You've noticed that in your WebGUI event list, you're seeing events like this, with the summary alert, WebGUI object server name, data source, event list, cache size is 3, hit rate 9%, and the object server is reporting that as a problem. So what exactly is causing this, and is it anything to worry about? First, let's look at why that event is occurring, and for that we need to go to the data sources page and load up our data source. In my case, I only have one, so let's select that and edit. So the first reason why that alert is occurring is the fact that we have results caching enabled. So if we go in here, caching for event list results, we can see that the event list cache is enabled. We see the cache expiry and the clean cache time. The second reason we're getting that alert is because self-monitoring is enabled. So looking in the self-monitoring tab, we can see that we have enable self-monitoring selected, and we can see that we have results cache as one of the kinds of self-monitoring that we have enabled. If we click on the if we just do a hover over the question mark, we can see what results caching is. And the third reason why we're getting that alert is because of the thresholds that are configured for the results cache. So if we click into configure threshold, we can see that we're going to get a severity 3 event if the percentage of the hit rate is below 20%, and we're going to get a severity 4%, which is what we've got on this occasion, if the percentage is below 10%. I mentioned the term hit rate, so what exactly does that mean? The hit rate is the percentage of times that a hit is recorded when checking an omnibus query against the WebGUI cache. And what's relevant to WebGUI when checking for a cache hit is the key, and that's made up of the actual SQL query that's being run by WebGUI, as well as the data source host and port that the query turns out to be run against. So if you happen to have multiple data sources, then there will be a separate cache key for the same query if it's being run against a different data source for this particular session. But it's also worth noting that the cache key doesn't have anything to do with different users. It's just the SQL query and the data source. So, should I concern myself very much with this alert? Well, not really. The main reason why you're likely to see an alert like that is either if you've recently restarted WebGUI, or if you have relatively low usage and the cache is taking time to rebuild itself. Also, if you have your cache settings set to expire quite quickly, the cache is going to need time to rebuild itself, and during that time it's quite normal to see alert messages like that. But you may decide that these messages are a nuisance, or that you would like to try to set them to a lower severity. So what are our options for either preventing that alert message from occurring, or otherwise getting it to have a lower severity than it currently has? Well, you can either do something about self-monitoring, or you can do something about caching. Let's look at self-monitoring first. You could disable self-monitoring completely, or otherwise, if you need other forms of self-monitoring but you don't need results cache self-monitoring, then you could go down here and disable the results cache. If, on the other hand, you wanted to reduce the severity of the alert, you could go to configure threshold and change the thresholds. So for example, instead of having a severity 3 or severity 4 event, you could change the threshold for 20% to a severity 1 and for 10% to a severity 2. So we can apply that. Your other option is to change the way WebGUI caches. This is not generally encouraged without direct support assistance, but just to tell you about your options, you could either completely disable event-list caching, although I don't necessarily recommend that for most installations, or you could change your cache expiry or clean time. Increasing your cache expiry and cache clean time, for example doubling the two of those properties, will mean that your cache expires less often and is cleaned out less often, which will give your cache more time to build to a point where you're getting a reasonably high percentage of hits.